and you have a completely bought and paid for communication system, which is what it's all about. So some of these things can be reversed by legislation. You don't need to amend the Constitution or talk to the Supreme Court. You can just pass a law as long as we start enforcing our laws as well. And we've got laws on the books that could be enforced that could help with some of this. I hope that helps. Did anybody else have a question? Yeah.
Yeah, I think you wrote something very recently about, you know, how you were hopeful that there would be some meaningful prosecution of the torture, people responsible for torture, because, you know, and I think your point was that the people who couldn't face the idea of impeachment might now be coming around to say, well, you know, it wouldn't be such a bad idea to go ahead and indict these people. Is there a way that we as private citizens can weigh in on this, and if so, how?
There are lots of ways and lots of good groups to support. I've got a website called prosecutebushcheney.org, prosecutebushcheney.org, that links you to all sorts of other groups and initiatives as well. But you know, it was a very strange situation pushing for impeachment while Bush and Cheney were around. You had the problem that the vice president was running the country. So if you try to impeach Bush, you get Cheney, who's in on all the crimes, and you have to impeach him too. If you try to impeach Cheney, you've still got Bush, and he comes up with a replacement for Cheney, and so on. And it's like too complicated for a Congress member. And then you've got the Democrats, the leadership of the Democrats, who will play only defense all the time, who are making this calculation that they would rather have Bush and Cheney around to campaign against. You know, impeachments are unpopular because Bill Clinton's impeachment was unpopular when, you know, the polls showed that the people didn't want Bill Clinton impeached. Every other impeachment through U.S. history has been popular. Many people have turned themselves into presidents by pushing for impeachment. Parties have won huge numbers of seats. I mean, the Democrats, when they went after Nixon, then had the biggest gains in recent history. But this was the way they were thinking. And so any groups that took their lead from the Democratic leadership at all were not going to touch impeachment. It was completely verboten. You just can't go anywhere near it. So you had human rights groups, you had lawyers groups, you had the ACLU, which led the way on Nixon, that wouldn't touch impeachment. And you had peace groups that were focused on the war, but were willing to push impeachment on war lies and war crimes, if you dragged them kicking and screaming. But you had a majority of the public in the corporate media's own polls favoring impeachment before anything happened. Before you had any hearings, before you had any discussion on TV, you had a majority of the public already ready to go. Then Bush and Cheney leave, and now the peace movement isn't really relevant because it gets defunded and in some degree simply disappears. And you know, because now they're Democratic wars, so they're okay. And yet the human rights groups, who wouldn't touch impeachment, are all ready to go on prosecution. They're doing great work. They're working with me and everybody else who's working for prosecution. So you know, the lawyers groups that were there on impeachment, like Center for Constitutional Rights, are still leading the charge on prosecution. But all these other ones, like the ACLU, that were not there at all, are there now. They want prosecution. And they're working hard and smart and strategically and aggressively for it. And we should be supporting all of these groups that are working on it. The tricky thing now is that we've lobbied the Justice Department for a prosecutor. And the ACLU and other groups have sued and filed Freedom of Information Act requests and gotten documents. You know, I mean, documents at the last minute as required by courts with huge sections blacked out, but have gotten documents that have made news and changed things and forced the Attorney General to take some sort of action. So he opened an investigation into whether to prosecute certain targeted bad apple, low-ranking staffers, but not the higher-ups, not the people pushing the paper, not the people giving the orders. And so The goal obviously is to not do a prosecution at all, to avoid it, to make this announcement that we're looking into it and then later have people lose interest. The possibility is that they do another bad apple prosecution, like with Abu Ghraib, where they target the lowest ranking folks and they let everybody off. That's gonna be tricky just because the lowest ranking folks are going to very publicly squeal on their superiors. But if they do it, it's worse than nothing. It's far worse than nothing, because it means that any future president can tell a lawyer to write a secret memo that says this crime is now legal, and it is. And it is, at least for the above the law class. You know, not necessarily for everybody lower down if they get caught, but for those making the laws, it's now legal. And so I think that's worse than nothing. So what we have to do is take this opportunity of having a prosecutor and pressure the Justice Department all the more to expand it and continue to work to expose more information and to use Congress. The House Judiciary Committee would not touch impeachment when Bush and Cheney were around because Nancy Pelosi did not want them to. The media would call them bad names. It would hurt them in the election because it was just too popular. And now you have a situation where they just impeached a judge from Texas for groping staffers, right? Because as you'll recall, in Article 2 of the Constitution, the president shall be impeached for treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors involving sex.
Yeah.
Because this is all it is now. If it's a Democrat and it involves sex, impeachment. If it's a Republican and it's a war criminal, it's okay. He can talk to our students in school, and if you don't like it, you're not a good American, right? So there is a guy named Jay Bybee who was in charge of the Office of Legal Counsel, which produced all of these memos, who was had a guy working for him named John Yoo. And Jay Bybee wrote memos legalizing torture, legalizing aggressive war at the whim of any future president without consulting anybody else, legalizing illegal spying, legalizing all sorts of crimes. You know, you hear about the torture, but it's a smorgasbord. He has a lifetime appointment just below the Supreme Court, which means he could conceivably move to the Supreme Court, but a lifetime appointment on an appeals court in the Ninth Circuit on the West Coast, deciding whether honest, law-abiding judges ruled correctly or not. He can and must be impeached. And the evidence of that is the memos. They are self-incriminating memos. I mean, these are personalized, custom torture memos. This guy can be tortured in these ways, with Jay Bybee's signature, which he does not dispute, right? So why not ask the House Judiciary Committee to impeach this guy? Most of their excuses about the trauma it would cause the nation to impeach Bush and Cheney and all the good things they were doing that it would distract from don't apply. They just don't apply. They can always come up with new excuses, right? And the excuse that you're hearing from the people in those offices is that, well, the media would accuse us of trying to remove a conservative judge for political reasons. Well, of course they would. Of course they would. Who the hell cares? People are not going to believe that. This is a guy who's legalized torture in black and white. If you can't go after that because Fox News wouldn't like it, what can you do? Right? Or they could simply bring him in to testify. Right? Senator Leahy, when some of these torture memos came out, said I Judge Bybee, would it trouble you too much? Would it be any inconvenience? Would you mind coming in and talk to us? Would that be okay? And he said, no, go to hell. And that was that. No subpoena. No subpoena. And if you were to subpoena him, you would have the same reaction from the current White House that you had from the last White House. What the hell are you doing? You can't just go around subpoenaing people. You had the White House legal counsel, Greg Craig, negotiate with John Conyers, chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, on how Karl Rove could partially comply, in secret at least initially, with his subpoenas.